All right. Hi, everyone. Let's move this camera here a little bit so I can see you. Not just kidding. I can't see you. My name is Björkman Benediktsson from Audio Issues, author of Step by Step Mixing. Let's make the camera adjust to the light. This is what happens when you have white covers and a lot of light. Um, Welcome to Happy Hour. This is the randomly regular happy hour where I sit and drink a beer in the studio and answer all your questions about audio production or mixing, or at least within my capabilities and knowledge. I try very hard not to make up the answers. Today, I'm drinking a Dragoon Santa Cruiser. Dragoon is a local brewery here in Tucson. We are in lockdown and therefore need to support local so they stay in business. So I'm happy to drink as much beer from local breweries as I can, honestly. Cheers, guys. Tell me in the comments what you're drinking. Even if you're drinking coffee, that's also fine. I see you, Steve. Oh, man, that's good. All right. How about we just start by giving a round of applause to everybody who showed up and asked a question, giving me all the content that I need to help this go smoothly. If you're just tuning in on the replay or whatnot, either watching now and you're just saw me come live on YouTube, go to audioissues.com or mixfinisher.com and download my cheat sheet. It's my 7-step cheat sheet for how to finish your mixes and make them translate to every speaker system that you play them through. And I hope that helps you confidently finish your mixes so that you can be proud to finish your records. If you're already on the email list, you probably already have that cheat sheet, so don't worry about subscribing to the email list again. But cheers again to those who are here. And let's get into some questions. All right, yay. Andrew says, yay for Dragoon from a fellow Tucsonan. Yeah, cheers, man. Cheers. All right, first of all, question for you from Nicholas. Nicholas, yep. When using a limiter, when using a limiter on a master channel bus, where should the ceiling and threshold levels be set? So I usually do -1 on the ceiling. So that's usually the standard now for streaming, and who's making, or don't get mad at me, but like very few people making mixes or masters for CDs. So -1 is sort of generally accepted now, and it's what I aim for. However, when it comes to the threshold, I rarely use the threshold itself. I tend to boost the output gain of whatever plugin is before and push the volume, push the level of the signal into the limiter instead of pushing down the threshold. It's a different technique, probably gives you about the same results, but it's something I learned from Ian Shepherd. And since I've called him the Jedi Master of mastering, I feel like I follow his advice. All right, Nicholas is happy with that answer, it seems. So let's go. Can you please explain sidechain? Danelle asks, I think I can show comments here. Yeah, Danelle Cloutier. I'm going to go with a heavy French accent on that. Can you please explain sidechains? What are they, how to use them, and when to use them? So sidechains are, all right, let's try to give you an example. So a good way to use sidechains is when your bass is cluttering up the kick drum, for instance. So when you can use a sidechain on the bass compressor, so that the compressor is actually listening to the kick drum, so that when the kick drum hits, it's compressing the bass. So the compressor is not compressing the bass, but it is compressing the bass, but it's listening to the kick drum. So whatever signal is coming into the compressor, it is from the kick drum as opposed to the track that the compressor is inserted on. So if you're inserting, another way to do this is a compressor on your guitars. So if you put a compressor on, especially if you can do a multi-band compressor, say you are compressing between 800 hertz and 3K on the guitars, and you sidechain that compressor so that every time the vocal comes in, the compressor uh, compresses the guitars just a couple of dBs down so that the vocal sits in um, front of the guitars so that the guitars are not in the way, because the high mid place is very popular for all instruments to be in. So hope that helped. Um, Craig Lynch says, I'm mixing a song using Easy Drummer, and for the life of me, cannot get the boom on it to come out. I've tried different bass drum samples. I run my bass DI, can make it sound great. Frustrating. Okay. Excuse me. So what I think you mean that so bass drum samples, so kick. So you run your bass DI, is that a bass guitar? Anyway, so let's try a few things. So getting the thick, and when you say boom, I assume you mean positive boom. So things like heaviness or thickness or weight in the low. So I would go looking from like 60 to 100 hertz for the thickness in the kick drum. A lot of times the point of the heaviness of the kick drum is in and around 60 hertz. And if that doesn't work, you can also use sub enhancers like the R bass. R bass is super convenient to add sort of artificial low end. I used it both on bass and kick drum, and it adds this extra heaviness to it. That's super great. You run your bass DI and can make it sound so. I think I get the question now. So the bass is not the problem, the kick is the problem. So try that. Try just like EQ and subsonic enhancers. R bass, there's a sub there are usually some sort of sub enhancers in all of the DAWs. In Logic, there's something called the sub bass or something like that I've used on occasion, but I use the R bass now. All right, next question. Let's grab a drink. All right, this is what we call dead air. All right. Illusion asks, if you start every project, what guides you using master? Because I can hear enough if I got nothing on master, some gain. Okay, so what I use on the master bus is just metering. So I have a master bus, and then I have a bus, and then the mix bus has saturation, Q, multiband compression, and then it has some of the waves plugins like the CLA mixdown and was mix. I tend to try to see if that makes the mix better or not, and then that's it. So EQ, compression, and saturation, unsurprisingly. However, be careful when you're mixing and you just do top-down mixing, because sometimes you can mix and mix and mix and mix, and after a while, you're wondering why your mix is so goddamn tiny, and then you realize that one of your compressor plugins or your this happened to me, one of your one of the Greg Wells mix-centric plugins was gain reducing like half of the life out of the mix, and just deactivating that plugin and reducing the intensity brought the mix back to life. So make sure you are when you are mixing that you are actually keeping the levels relatively consistent into the mix bus, because anything you put on there is basically a gatekeeper of sorts. They stand there and take all of the signal in, and if you're pushing more and more signal in from all the tracks and all your buses and all your groups, because you're adding gain through EQ or adding too much makeup gain on your compressors or things of that nature, then that gatekeeper, that compressor at the end is keeps pushing more and more and more. So make sure that you're always cognizant of what's going on your mix bus throughout the mix. Chris Janton says, hi, Björkman, and I say, hi, Chris. He is a fellow Sonar here, so just want to say hi to him. And then also, let's go through these comments. Steven says, howdy from Texas. Howdy back. I would love to have the paperback version of the book. Well, you can. It is available on stepbystepmixing.com for a very affordable price, I would say. You can't really I'm not a college professor that makes you buy 90 dollars ebooks. If my courses are higher than price, there's video components and additional bonuses included, but I will not overcharge you like your professor. Anyway, Alka students drinking Alka-Seltzer, Fat Tire Amber Ale, yeah. Drum roll hazy pale ale. That's amazing. That's something that I would definitely want to have. Better than a drum roll loop in Logic. Cool, cool, cool. All right. Let's see if there's no questions. Nicholas asks a follow-up question. Is that sub enhancer also like a transient processor, or are those two separate? So there's two separate things. A transient designer is different than a sub bass than the sub bass. Like the R bass or the sub bass in Logic is different. But the enveloper in Logic is the transient designer, and there's tons of transient designers out there. They're super useful for just shaping the track itself. I use it a lot on drums very recently. And I'll get back to that actually in a minute. What can you tell me about setting an enveloper? An enveloper is always a hard word to say. Transient designer. Broad question. Okay, no, it's a good question. There's kind of two things that a transient designer does. It either increases or reduces the attack. Is the right way to do it? If the waveform is like left to right. Okay, yeah. So it increases or reduces the attack. So if you need more attack from the kick drum, but you don't want to like overly boost 3K or the high mids because that doesn't sound good, you can just boost the transient response of the kick instead. Or if it's too super clicky, maybe you have a really strummy acoustic guitar that sounds weirdly shrill, you can reduce the attack. And then on the other side is the decay or the sustain, depending on how you what you call it. I think multiple plugin manufacturers call it different things. And that makes you so that you can increase the sustain. So the the envelope the envelope of the signal either is longer or more sustained, or you cut it off shorter. So for instance, I did this on a track recently. I do have a link here. I'm gonna put that in the comments. And this link is to a YouTube video where I talk about how I did a gate and a transient designer on a kick drum to reduce sort of the bleed from the room. It was a lot of very sort of oomphy or woofy in the room. So I took out all the sustain of the kick. So it just was a very short kick, like a and it was a rock song, so it fit well with the mix. And then I added an R bass on top of that to add more low end because I was taking a lot of the load by reducing the sustain of the kick drum. So cool. Let's go. Yeah. Answer this question. Hi from Sydney. Not a question, but have done a lot of your online courses, but you also inspired me to buy here, there, and everywhere. Hey, great book, huh? Yeah, so good. If you haven't read Here, There, and Everywhere by Jeff Emmerich, the engineer of the Beatles, log on to Amazon right now, download it to your Kindle, or put it in the post, and take the weekend and read it. You will not regret it. Some amazing stories in there, really fun. It's just the right amount of audio nerdy, and also just fun in general to see the behind the scenes of the Beatles making all those records. Illusion asks, are you using compressor and kick drum with sidechain filter on it? For example, BX Opto compressor got censored. Okay. So I don't use, I use a compressor on a kick drum all the time. Usually on 1176 or the like, or sometimes it's just the FET or a field effect transistor and FET compressor of sorts. I use that on a kick drum, but I rarely use the side chain on the kick drum compressor. Usually it's on the bass to make kick drum cut through, because then you compress, like I said before, you compress the kick drum and the compressor is listening to the kick drum and compressing the bass to let the bass through. All right, let's go to some questions here in my notes. One really long question from JC. Jesus in the house here, probably making records for a 12-man band. I have a home studio recently built. It's a nice acoustically treated room, and I'm using Focusrite Scarlett 18i8 interface. My main recording sessions are either two-person podcasts or full bands minus the drums. However, I only record one instrument at a time. I use plugins, this and that, and the other thing. And his question is, I'm wondering what pieces of equipment I can purchase within reason to improve the overall quality of my recordings. I've been looking at the SSL6 board, although some people say it's a drastic improvement, while other claim it's just an overpriced unit. One of my friends suggested that I get an API preamp or another preamp instead of going for the full board. So I've kind of flipped my thought process around. I used to be like, you can get whatever sound with whatever. And that is true up to a point. You can certainly enhance a lot of shitty recordings in the mix with the right plugins and the right ears and the right treatment. But it is so much easier to make a mix sound amazing if it is a good recording, not just good performance, but also just sonically well done recording. You don't always have to go for the high expensive mics, but if you have cash to burn and you want to buy gear, I would spend it on where you use things the most. So if you're always recording something, maybe a preamp is a good option. Or if you already have good mics, maybe a preamp is a good option. But if you have a good preamp or you have a decent enough preamp and you don't have good mics, maybe the mic is a good option. If you're like me, mostly doing mixing and mastering, then my purchase choices are going to be a lot different. I won't buy a preamp because I rarely do recording. I would rather buy a different plugin that I feel like I'm lacking. I just bought the Pro Q3 from FabFilter. It's very, very good, quite amazing. Their dynamic EQ things do some really cool stuff, and a multi-band compressor for mastering. So it's really just think about what you use the most, and like, so what is the most common thing that you do, and if that is the most important thing to, and if you improve that, does the overall quality of your work go up? So think about it that way, because I can't recommend a single piece of gear because I don't know your situation enough. And there's too many, there's too much equipment out there. All right, let's move through here. Anakin Fuentes asks, some help regarding guitar mixing for metal and tight palm muting playing would be much appreciated. Really appreciate these emails. They've helped a bunch. Thank you for writing in, Anakin, all the way from a galaxy far, far away. I really appreciate your interest in recording at this time. Good thing that you're coming back from the dark side. But as for the darker side of hardcore music, I would recommend one thing I recently discovered, that the cymbals in metal songs really help the guitar. So when you're mixing guitars with like really heavy, like crashy drums, try to mix the guitar and the cymbals together and see whether you can create sort of this like intensity in the mix. And then as for a guitar chain, I just literally stole my guitar chain from Jordan Lariat of the Hardcore Music Studio, and he actually, let's find this link. He's actually doing a really cool video series called the Full Stack Producer Series, and I highly recommend you sign up for that. And if you, like I said to my email subscribers today, if you sign up for that hardcore, for the Full Stack Producer Series, and watch the videos and then leave a comment and take a screenshot of that comment and send it to me, I'll send you my 40-minute mix template workshop on how I create my mix template and how my mix process so how I basically how my workflow is sped up because of how I use mix template. So I highly recommend checking that out. Check out the link there in the comments and sign up for that if you are interested to learn more about hardcore, heavy music tracking and mixing and editing as well. All right. Ivan Yumambo. Cool. What I need to do, and what he asks is, what do I need to do to make my mixing sound greater? I have this challenge of how to add reverb on my instruments and background vocals, and how do I compress them? That's a pretty broad question. I would recommend, as for um, vocals in general, just post this link, this article from contributor Brad Pack at Punchy Kick on Instagram, I think his handle is. He writes for us regularly, and he just wrote this article on 4 different vocal chains for 4 different genres. So if you want to look into how you get a specific sound for a specific genre, I'd recommend checking that article out. And as for compression, I like the fast and slow method. So a FET compressor, taking the peaks, and then a slower compressor like an Opto LA2A or whatnot. After that, sort of squeezing, hugging vocals. Uh, Barring that, I really just use the R-Box a lot, and that's just on my vocal bus. Anything else on reverb? Adding reverb, I just add reverbs via sends, have bass bus on my mix template, and it usually has a combination of a reverb of some sort and a stereo delay. Sometimes I blend them together, sometimes they're separate. Just obviously depends on the song. What's going on here? Jay Barros, he asks, everything is going well. It is. Thanks for asking. I would like to know how you deal with phase issues, like recording with 2 or 3 microphones at once. What is your approach to correct that? And what are the primary things you do when you start mastering? All right, so I check the polarity of the signals when recording. So, for instance, if I'm recording a drum kit and there's 2 overhead mics pointing down at the snare, and I want to know if they're in phase with one another, I just ask the drummer to hammer the snare 1 time really hard, and I record that bit, and then I zoom in on 2 waveforms, on overhead left and overhead right, and I make sure that they in positive and negative polarity. So they have to go both like that. And that's how I check for at least issues. Phase is a little excuse me. For recording with multiple, there are a lot of different techniques, like the 3-to-1 rule, where if you're have 2 mics in front of it, and let's say it's away from the instrument, uh, it the second mic should be feet away from the mic, and then it's 1 feet. Does that make sense? So if you do it in feet or hands, because it's easier to just demonstrate. So 1, 2, and 3, and then if the 2 mics would be 1. That's how you would stereo mic something with the 3-to-1 rule. However, you can make it super easy on yourself and just use the XY technique and put your condensers like that, so that they're aiming like that. Hope that makes sense. There's a lot of articles about that. You go to the recording resources page on audio issues. There's a really good stereo microphone article, or a stereo microphone chapter or section in the article on recording acoustic. So check that out. And to start mastering, so first of all, I make sure it's finished. Make sure the artist is happy with the mix. If the artist is also the mixing engineer, then he will let you know they're happy with that. And then when you get the mix, make sure that the mix has enough headroom. Maybe -6 is a good place to be. That leaves you plenty of room to add stuff to it. And then I usually put the song on a loop, and I go through mastering template and chains. So I load up my metering plugins, which is usually the Voxengo span frequency balance, frequency analysis meter, the dynameter, And then I have an EQ, linear phase EQ. Now it's the FabFilter Pro Q3, and then the multiband compressor, a saturation plugin, usually the filter Saturn. So I basically just endorsing Saturn, endorsing FabFilter here, because those are all FabFilter products and they're great. But then I also have Foss, which is a very interesting intelligent EQ, sort of an automatic EQ, and I use that. And then sometimes I use the Art TJ mastering chain or mastering plugin from Waves, and everything always ends up going through my Ozone 8, and that's usually just for any small EQ tweaks, and then some stereo widening, and then limiting. All right, we have any more questions here? Mhm. Alright. Steven Schnedler Music asks, I am a trumpet player. Hardest part is tone of the horn. EQ helps, but it is hard to get balance of brightness without sounding too tinny. Tinny, probably. What software recommendation to shape the sound? First of all, when it comes to recording, having a ribbon mic on hand might be helpful because they will normally reproduce a smoother sound, especially in the higher mids. In the mids and higher mids and the highs, but in the mix there is the tinny sound, which is normally sort of around 1K, and you can get away with cutting the tin away while still adding brightness, because if you want to add brightness, you can go all the way up to 5 to 8K and boost that frequency area instead, while reducing the tinniness. So you should be able to smooth out the harshness in the 1 to 2-ish K, and then add some brightness after that, um, in the high mids. And then you can also, add tape emulation, tape saturation might dull some of that stuff, and then compression. I don't know if there's like a lot of really harsh transients. Maybe you want to do a fast attack on the compressor, but I don't really. You'd have to try that out. I wouldn't know off the top of my head what is a fast and hard and fast rule or not. Charge for mixing sessions, I'm interested in mastering a piano album I've been working on. So I do not a lot of mixing sessions as a traditional mixing engineer. I tend to do mixing sessions for students that have bought some of my courses or in some of my programs, or are mix coaching students. So it's more of a collaboration between me and the student on making the best song possible. So it I'm different in that way. I don't charge in the same way that a normal traditional mixing engineer would charge. So I have a different business model, honestly. So Jeff Takak says, I rely heavily on automation, especially for volume, but also use it to apply some echo, reverb, etc. But automation seems to be allowed for others. Take on that. Yeah, it's funny that it's always kind of a last resort, and I'm guilty of that as well. I honestly use automation very not as much as I probably should. A lot of times I use automation at the very start if I hear that something needs to be louder in certain areas, or I need to tame something, but sometimes it's at the end to fix certain things. So I think automation is super useful, but I think it just doesn't get as much use as it should, because it's not as sexy as using EQ and fancy tools. And some people might find it boring to draw on the waveforms. So I don't really have an answer to that, other than like, well, yeah, it's an underutilized tool, and we should all probably think about using it more. However, I will say that when people say I don't use compression, I use automation and gain writing, that's fine. I don't really care with whatever floats your boat, whatever works for you. But there is a difference between compressor isn't just an automatic level changer. A compressor adds different character, different tone sometimes. So automation it can't really replace the sound of a compressor. that's my little tangent on that. Shannon Modrell asks, which is harder, mixing vocal with music or mixing a cappella with harmony parts? I would probably say that it's harder to mix vocals with music, uh, because I think that if you gave me a cappella parts, I don't know, I haven't ever mixed a choir per se, but usually choirs are also just recorded with a stereo microphone technique. I recorded a symphony down here in Old Tucson Studios a while back, and we used, I think, 3 microphones or 4 microphones or something like that. So you can't really mix, you can't really create separation in a lot of ways if you don't have the tracks. But if you have a lot of different acapella parts and they're all on individual tracks, that might be easier because you're able to create separation with EQ. You're able to find little pockets in which to boost a little bit here and there to bring out the character of every vocal without making them clash together. That's my that's my sort of sight unseen opinion on that. Steven says he does use multiple ribbon mics. So yes, and a ribbon mic usually, tames the high end. So you might want to just check around 1K and start cutting there and maybe add brightness somewhere else. All right. Rodney Mayfield asks, here are my questions. If I boost in the 3K frequency on my vocals, I have to cut 3K and all of the other instruments in my session in order to make room for the vocal. Well, probably not, but it also depends. Maybe, maybe not. But if you find that other instruments are interfering in that area, you may want to reduce that range in your guitar. So at the beginning of happy hour, I was talking about how you can reduce the range in your guitars between maybe like 900 to 3K to give the vocal that pocket. And if you find that that's happening in that frequency range, you may want to carve out some pockets for your instruments there. And yeah, so side chain feedback compression, like I was talking about earlier. And he says, in order to get my bass guitar or my sub bass to be more prominent in the mix, should I put a widening plugin as the last insert on my bass? No, I don't think so. I don't think you should use widening on the low end. It seems like that's just gonna maybe cause more problems than you hope to solve with it. However, I want some width in the bass, and that's fine. But I'd rather add some width in the mids, and I don't think you should do it in the lows. You should probably do it, 300 hertz and upwards, or maybe in 700 to 2K and something like that. And often I find it very useful to have a parallel bass chain so that I send my bass track to a parallel chain that has all the low end filtered out, and it maybe has it doesn't have a widening plugin usually, but it has saturation or an EQ that boosts a lot of those, and that way it can cut through the mix, especially on small speakers. And you might want to experiment putting a widening plugin on that might widen up or give that bass the perceived wideness in the mids rather than sort of screwing with your low end, because that might not be the greatest solution. All right. Feel free for anyone who is watching to ask a question. I'm taking questions that pop in, but otherwise I'll just continue going through the regions that have been submitted to me via email. And once again, cheers. I'm drinking Dragoon Santa Cruz Nail, one of my favorite beers from one of my favorite Tucson breweries. And if you're just tuning in and you just randomly found this, but my name is Björkvin Benediktsson and I run Audio Issues. And I'm having a drink with my lovely subscribers and followers on YouTube and answering any questions about mixing that I can. All right. Nishant Celestine Turkey. After building a complete, she asks, he or she, I I don't know. After building a complete idea and before turning channels to audio channels for mastering, is it good to exchange surgical EQ with linear phase EQ to each and every channel? No, so I use just normal EQ, whatever that means. Uh, just like a zero latency EQ on every channel during the mix. And then if I'm mastering something, I put a linear phase EQ on that. So no, I think is the answer. Is what's oh, here's another question. Is there any plugin to visualize panning of instruments and also how to efficiently pan them? So the best, I don't mean to be facetious, but maybe I do. The best plugin to visualize panning is your ears, because you should be able to tell where your instrument is coming from as you pan them. Uh, but if you're trying to create interesting separation and just overall balance, I would recommend panning in mono and seeing how you like it. I tend to mix 80% of the mix in mono on a tiny little mix tube, and I even do my panning there to sort of find these like weird micro shifts. Yeah, micro shifts. I don't know if that's the correct term, but it helps. All right. Christian asks, any Carnivaleros virtual gigs coming up? Carnivaleros is a band that I'm in here in Tucson, and I don't know. I don't think so. I think we are too big, too loud to create a virtual gig, so I'm not sure we can pull that one off. But you have to ask Gary. I'm not the right person to ask. He runs the ship. All right, Nicholas filled out my coaching form online, so great. Yeah, I'll be excited to see how I can help you out. That's awesome. All right, little Cam asks, I have a low quality mic and an older laptop with Windows 7. Is there any way I can boost the quality or any tips on mixing to make it sound better? My mic sensitivity is turned all the way up and sometimes is choppy and cuts out words. What do you think I should do? Well, unfortunately, I think that is not a sufficient system to record quality music on. It sounds like you're not using an interface or proper studio recording or a proper studio recording mic. Like almost anything is better than that. I would, even a USB mic or a nice smartphone mic is even better than what that setup seems to look like to me. So it's not very expensive to get a portable recording rig set up. You don't need a lot of money to buy one mic, one interface, and either GarageBand that's free or Reaper that's $40. You should be able to set up a uh, minimal recording setup for a very, very, for a very, 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 very affordable price. Any other questions in the chat? Let me know. But otherwise, I'll continue. Neil asks, I follow your online advice avidly, so thank you for your freely given advice and hints. They are very helpful. Cheers. Thanks for reading. I record my own material on Logic Pro. I record myself playing live guitars, mostly modern jazz type stuff, and use drum loops and MIDI basses from Trillion for backing. I live in a remote part of Scotland, so no access to players in this genre. I want to achieve a live type sound, but also good depth and separation. Any advice? Thank you. Best regards. I was actually fooled by virtual instruments this week. A guy sent me a recording of his sort of traditional jazz type stuff, and I thought it was just a bunch of guys playing some cool music in a room. And then he told me that it was all programmed except he played the piano. So I think that you can uh, first of all, if your samples are good enough and your playing is good enough, that should be the first step. If you're using very artificial sounding samples, that might just give you away from the start. But then using artificial reverb sound like playing in the same room is the way to do it. And other than that, I don't think that there's necessarily any problems with being geographically isolated in these days. Technically, everybody's geographically isolated these days because nobody's allowed to leave their house. So what you might want to do is just find players online that have a recording setup and can actually give you real performances from their home studio. On Better and Air gigs are great examples of places you can find people to help you collaborate, or people that can collaborate with you on your music and your records. All right, I should have some. All right, Steven asks again, how do you carve out space on an instrument with EQ without actual tone of an instrument? The well, so first of all, depending on how many instruments are in the arrangement, you there's less EQ needed. So I would think, unless you have problems with resonant frequencies, or things of that nature where there's buildup because of it was recorded in a home studio or something like that, and it was in a subpar studio or whatnot. But if you have less instruments, you might not need to be as drastic with EQs. However, when you're carving out, I tend to sweep around the EQ. I boost up and I sweep around on one instrument, find where I feel like that instrument is sort of coming out, sort of feels like it's a little more present, or it's flattering itself in some way because that frequency is helping it sounding sort of like that frequency is the makeup on the actor, if you want to think of it that way. And then you can do that with another instrument, and until you find all of the sort of flattering frequencies everywhere else. Sometimes that might cause all the instruments to clash. So at this point, you can go back and you can cut that same frequency that you've cut in one instrument, and you cut it in one instrument and then leave it up in another instrument. And if you're not doing drastic cuts and boosts, then you shouldn't be losing a lot of tone. And then also always make sure that you're doing all of this um, in the context of the mix. Don't do this in solo, because things that sound terrible in solo might actually sound really good in the mix. I was doing a mix the other day. It was a jazz tune, and there was a string section. It was a stereo string section, and after I had EQ'd it to fit with the mix, it just brought it. It was sat nicely in the back of the mix. The strings came in and pushed up the mix in that area, or in that part of the song. But if you soloed that string section, it sounded terrible. So don't think of the essential tone of the instrument being the essential tone in solo. Think of how it fits with whatever you're doing with it in context of the mix. And then sometimes you don't have to be so drastic about cutting and boosting. All right, let's move to here. Let's see. Thanks for being there for amateurs like me. How loud should my mix be in preparation for mastering? Oh, I answered this again. I answered this earlier. Minus 6 dB of headroom is probably a good idea. And then, is it okay to keep using the same template to release all of my songs, or should I always start with each project on canvas? So let's say whatever makes your workflow more efficient, so that you can focus on creativity rather than pushing buttons and loading plugins and finding synths. So working within limitations, that because you know the tool that you have, and you have them all at your disposal without needing to waste time, is way better than thinking you need to reinvent your workflow every time. Just wastes so much time. So uh if you have limitations, it can actually induce creativity. So as long as the songs sound and feel different, I'd say stick with the template. I always use a mixed template that's based on the most common things that I tend to see in a mix, or tend to get to mix. And sometimes I don't use half the template because it doesn't if necessary. Sometimes there aren't any drums, so I don't need to use any of my drum buses or any of my drum processing. But using a template makes your workflow faster. So stick to the template, and because I don't think you can write the same song twice. All right, here, let's do one more question. Oh, yeah. Steven, you're welcome. That's key. You can't do things in solo. I mean, it's great to hear things in solo if you're looking for something, but always do it in the context of the mix if you can, or maybe context within the individual groups. Sometimes I'll solo just the drums to hear things inside the drums, but ultimately everything has to fit together because we're not mixing tracks, we're mixing songs. So you want to make sure that anything you do fits the song as a whole, not the track independently. David Manto asks, speaking of being geographically associated, any suggestions on tracking a full rock band at home? Not kidding, man. Basically, suggestions for recording in an untreated basement. So let's hide this real quick. So this is a small room. This is my studio, my home studio. I do most of my work in here. Obviously, I do mostly mixing and education, but I have filled this room up with a full band, five dudes cranking out songs, and just you know uh, drums in the corner there, and bass player standing over here, guitar player, maybe the guitar player is all singing, so he has a guide vocal. If there's another guitar player, I usually put the amp in the bathroom, and then put a bunch of blankets over him because the bathroom is tile, and um, and then everybody wears headphones, and then I sit over here. My engineer sits here, but I don't really do that anymore. But it was very possible to put a full band in. So what I need, so I usually have about 10 inputs available at a time. I don't have a 24 track capability or anything like that in this space. So, but I could get away with it because 10 tracks is in a small room like this. That's kick, snare, overheads in the recorder man configuration, and maybe a room mic if possible. So that's 5. And then there's bass, usually DI'd, and there's guitar, and even if there's another guitar, and then we have maybe room for 2 vocals or 1 vocal, or maybe, sometimes it's been violin in the kitchen, or sometimes it's been an acoustic guitar where they play outside the room. So working in that home studio capacity can be quite challenging, but a lot of fun and very, very sweaty. So, so I hope that helps out. You can definitely do that in a small basement like that. So, untreated basement, maybe try to figure out how to put some treatment up, and baffles, any sort of carpets, and if you have any sort of acoustic foam or acoustic baffles that you can use. You can, if you have really, really thick curtains, you can hang them on the wall. Just anything that kind of dampens things a little bit, that could be a good place to do. I was reading, but actually, this is how I'm going to end it. But I was reading the Recording Unhinged by Sylvia Massey, and this book is amazing. You should also check that one out. And she was talking about how Serge Tankian of System of a Down, he put up a tent in the middle of a room, and that's where he sang all of his vocals. So I don't know if if that works for you, but maybe if you have an untreated basement and you don't have the ability to acoustically sound absorb or sound treat or the basement, you might be able to come up with some crazy solutions like that. John says, "Yo, Bergman, you're doing well, my friend." And I say thank you so much. Yeah, Sylvia Massey's it's great. So I'm gonna do one last question, and it's from Barbara Shaw, and it's a little bit of a different question, but I think it's helpful for anybody who is now struggling to work from home or is trying to figure out how to create content or promote themselves online because they can't go hit the clubs and say hi to bands. And so She asks, "How do I manage a successful online presence in a healthful way?" So, basically, I take this as meaning, how can I keep creating content and market myself online without burning out and without uh, being torn in five different uh, directions at once? And I would recommend aim for consistency. So if you know you can't write daily, don't start writing daily. Aim for a publication schedule that is doable for you. So if you instead of writing 10 articles one each day and then publishing daily and then being burned out after 10 days, write those 10 articles, but publish them weekly because that gives you 10 weeks of a buffer that was helpful for you to create more content. So it gives you a longer runway, and online marketing is a marathon, not a sprint. So that's number one. Play to strengths. I am predominantly a writer. I tend to do a lot more videos these days. I love live because I'm a big fan of improv and sort of thinking on my feet and those sorts of things. So that's why I think it's a little bit outside my comfort zone to do live videos, but it's so much easier to do because here I am. This is what I'm doing. If I screw up, I screw up. And that's just how it is. If I stumble over my words, I stumble over my words. But if you want to start, if you're just getting started, you should play to your strengths. So you're a good writer, write articles. If you like talking, create a podcast. If you think you're great on video and make it look easy to make looking videos, do video. Friend Chris Lim online, an amazing video maker, and his YouTube channel is something I don't think I'd ever be able to compete with. But so play to your strengths and know what you can pull off easily, instead of going with whatever trend du jour is. Go to do what everybody else is doing. Start doing something that you're good at because it'll also give you the confidence to keep going. Because and if you have consistent doing something you love that you hopefully back down. And then, yeah, so that goes into my third bullet point here. Don't bite off more than you can chew. So don't create a YouTube channel, a podcast, a Instagram recipe blog, and a and like a Twitch stream or whatever on the same day. Just start doing things one by one. I started blogging, wrote a lot. This was back in 2008, 2009. Started blogging, wrote a bunch, predominantly on Facebook. And then I moved to Instagram. I did a lot of content on Instagram. And then now I'm doing YouTube. So I'm not doing anything sort of at the same time. I'm doing one thing at a time, and then they sort of overlap uh, after I've gotten confident and created a process that's helpful and is sustainable in the long run. Because if you want to be in business doing whatever it is that you do, you want to be sustainable because you want to still be in business in 5 to 10 years. And I've run audio years, and it's been a great journey so far. And I'm just getting started with YouTube. I think. I mean, I've had a YouTube channel for forever, but I haven't been consistently making content for YouTube at all. So this is just the start of that extra journey on me because now this is just the next step. So start where you can start, be consistent, don't do too much at a time, and don't get outside your comfort zone, and be consistent with whatever it is that you want to create. So that's my advice for that. And hope you found this live happy hour useful. And let's see. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, Pete Johns. So I hope you found this useful. Cheers to you all for coming, and thanks for stopping by, and see you all next time. All right. Thanks for watching.